Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us somewhere ancient, vast, and almost entirely untouched, into the deep sea, Earth's last mysterious frontier. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our descent into the deep sea together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Imagine yourself floating on a small raft in the middle of a quiet ocean. No land in sight, just the sway of water, the shimmer of stars overhead, and the slow hush of waves beneath you. As you look down, you realise that beneath the surface, below the dancing moonlight and the layer where sunlight fades, lies a world so vast, so silent and so unknown, it feels less like part of Earth and more like a forgotten universe. This is the deep sea. When we say deep, we don't just mean far away, we mean a depth where sunlight cannot reach. A place where pressure builds like the weight of mountains stacked upon your shoulders, where temperatures fall just above freezing, and life, if it exists, glows, drifts, or disappears into the blackness. Scientists define the deep sea as anything below 200 meters, where light grows dim and familiar forms of life begin to vanish. But that's only the beginning. Most of the ocean is much deeper than that. The average depth of Earth's oceans is about 3,700 meters. The deepest trench we've discovered, the Mariana Trench, plunges down over 11,000 meters, deeper than any mountain is tall. At these depths, every extra 10 meters adds another full atmosphere of pressure. That means that by the time you reach the bottom of the trench, the weight pressing on you is over 1,000 times stronger than the air you're breathing right now. To put it simply, if a human body were dropped down without protection, it wouldn't sink like in the movies. It would be crushed silently in an instant. Not violently, not loudly, just gone. That pressure is one reason why we've explored so little of the deep sea. It's not just that it's deep, it's that it's difficult. The cold alone would shut down most machines. The darkness makes navigation nearly impossible. And the cost? Sending a single robotic submersible down for a few hours can run into the millions. So despite living on a planet covered mostly by water, we've only mapped around 25% of the ocean floor with any precision. In contrast, we've mapped all of Mars, the Moon, even Venus. We know more about distant planets than we do about the trenches under our feet. And yet, that strangeness, that unknown, is also what draws us in. For all our satellites and sensors, the deep sea remains a place of wonder, where science meets something quieter. Curiosity, yes, but also humility. A sense that here, in this dark and ancient space, we are visitors, small ones. People often say the deep ocean feels like the subconscious of the Earth, that if forests are lungs and rivers are veins, the deep sea is the dreaming mind. It's no coincidence that phrases like unfathomable, plumbing the depths, or still waters run deep are part of our language. They carry more than geography. They carry feeling. The ocean, especially the deep, has always stirred something in us. Fear, or maybe even reverence. And tonight, we'll follow that feeling. Not to rush, not to conquer, but to drift, to listen, to sink slowly, not just through layers of salt water, but through stories of bioluminescent creatures and ancient myths, of crushing pressures and glowing life, of our limited understanding and the vast mystery that continues to stretch beyond our reach. So take a breath and then let it go. Let your thoughts begin to settle like sand in still water. Let yourself descend slowly, gently, as if gravity has softened and you're being carried downward on a quiet current. Because that's where we're going. Not just beneath the surface of the sea, but beneath the surface of knowing itself. Welcome to the deep. Let's begin our descent, not just into the ocean, but into the realities that make this world beneath the waves so difficult to reach, to understand and to stay with. As you drift lower, away from the familiar surface and the dancing light above, something begins to change. The sunlight grows tired, colours lose their grip. Red is the first to go, fading into a muddy grey. Then orange, yellow and green. By the time you pass 200 metres, even the faintest hints of daylight have surrendered. What's left is darkness, deep, absolute and undisturbed. Down here, darkness isn't a metaphor. It's a physical truth. There is no moonlight filtering softly through kelp, no glimmer, no shimmer. Below that threshold, the sea becomes not just unlit, but lightless. And in this perpetual night, all familiar senses begin to blur. But light is only the first thing that disappears. Pressure begins to accumulate long before you reach the abyss. It builds slowly, patiently, relentlessly. For every 10 metres you sink, another atmosphere of pressure presses against you. That's the same amount of force as all the air stacked from sea level to the edge of space now being added layer by layer. At the depth of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11,000 metres deep, that means over 1,000 atmospheres. It's like placing the weight of 50 jumbo jets on a single square metre. Imagine, for a moment, the air around you in this quiet room. It feels weightless, comforting. Now imagine that same air, multiplied 1,000-fold, pressing inward from every direction, not just above, but beneath, behind and within. This is not a pressure you can push back against. It is simply there, like the weight of time, undeniable and patient. If you or I were dropped into the trench without protection, we wouldn't drift slowly downward like seaweed. We would vanish, flattened, broken, and absorbed into the cold without ceremony. And that cold is its own challenge. Near the ocean floor, temperatures hover just above freezing, often between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius. But it isn't the kind of cold that stings your skin. It's the kind that seeps into things. The kind that slows molecules and thickens oils and stiffens metal. Cold that doesn't scream but waits. Machines, sensors, batteries, they all tire more quickly in such a climate. Their strength isn't just tested, it's eroded. This world below isn't like the surface world you know, and perhaps surprisingly it's not exactly like space either. People often compare the deep sea to outer space, and in some ways that's fair. Both are cold, both are vast, both are dark and largely uninhabitable. But space is, in a strange way, forgiving. It is a vacuum. There is nothing there to crush you. The deep sea, however, is full of weight, of pressure, of molecules pressing inward. Outer space is the absence of presence. The deep ocean is presence in its most overwhelming form. Space will ignore you. The deep sea will embrace you tightly. That's why exploring it is so difficult. Not just because it's far or strange, but because it's built to resist intrusion. Every aspect of this environment says, not yet, not now, not easily. You cannot simply send down a diver in a reinforced suit. Human lungs collapse under such pressure. Cameras crack, lights flicker out. Even the most durable alloys begin to weaken over time. And the further you go, the harder everything becomes, until the sea itself seems to have written its own set of laws, ones that we, so far, can only tiptoe around. And yet, there is something magnetic about this resistance. The very fact that we cannot easily reach these depths makes them more compelling. There is a purity in how little we know, a kind of smilpen that science hasn't yet broken. That silence is not just a lack of data, it's a presence of humility, a reminder that for all our satellites and sensors, for all our algorithms and maps, most of our own planet remains unvisited and unseen. The ocean is not ignoring us. It is simply waiting. Even now, as you rest in your room, breathing slowly, perhaps feeling the pull of sleep beginning to weigh on your eyelids, there is a place beneath you, far below, where no light reaches, no sound echoes for long, and pressure holds every particle in place. It is not empty, but it is unknown. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we keep trying to go there. Not to conquer it, but to witness it. To listen to a place that does not speak back, but still says something. To touch something ancient and come away changed. The deep sea doesn't simply hide itself, it resists discovery with quiet persistence. Even when we know it's there, even when we yearn to explore it, the tools we need remain fragile, imperfect, and often staggeringly expensive. For all the talk of human innovation, there is still no easy way to knock on the ocean's deepest doors without being met by the full weight of its silence. And yet, we have tried. Perhaps the most famous explorer of the deep is a small submersible named Alvin. First launched in the 1960s and still in operation today, Alvin has taken scientists to depths of over 400 meters. It's not flashy. From the outside it looks a little like an oversized bathtub with mechanical arms. But inside, Alvin is a miracle of quiet resilience. Its thick titanium hull protects its occupants from the crushing pressure. Its sensors and cameras record what human eyes cannot see unaided. And when it surfaces, it carries more than just samples. It carries stories of vent-dwelling worms, glowing shrimp, and strange landscapes no one had ever seen before. Then there's the Deep Sea Challenger, made famous by filmmaker James Cameron. In 2012, Cameron descended solo into the Mariana Trench, becoming only the third human to ever reach its bottom. He described it not as a thrilling ride, but as a surreal one. The descent took over 2 hours. The darkness became total, the pressure unimaginable. And when he reached the sea floor, what greeted him was not some dramatic alien scene, but a calm, barren stillness. A world of pale mud and quiet dust, where the only movement was his own. Most deep-sea exploration, however, doesn't involve people at all. Remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, have become the workhorses of underwater science. These tethered machines are piloted from ships above, navigating with cameras, robotic arms and sonar. They don't need oxygen, they don't get claustrophobic, and they can stay down for hours, even days. Some, like Jason and Ropes, have helped discover entire new ecosystems, collect samples, and map regions that had only been guesses before. They are the eyes and hands of human curiosity, reaching into places we cannot go ourselves. Even more advanced are the autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, robots that think in their own quiet way. These machines aren't tethered to a ship. They are pre-programmed to dive, drift and return. They hum quietly through the blackness, collecting data and building maps as they go. And when they surface, they bring back not only numbers and graphs, but glimpses of a world still unfolding in the dark. But even with these tools, we remain far from completion. That's why scientists around the globe have launched an ambitious plan called Seabed 2030. Its goal is deceptively simple: to map the entire ocean floor, every mountain, trench and ridge by the end of the decade. It sounds like something we should have already done. After all, we live on this planet. We've sent probes to Pluto. Surely we know our own terrain, and yet we don't. The reason is not neglect, it's difficulty. Sound travels better than light in water, which is why sonar remains our best option. A sonar map is built by sending out pulses of sound and listening for their echoes. But imagine trying to map the Grand Canyon blindfolded, with only the echoes of your footsteps to guide you. Now multiply that challenge by the size of the Pacific Ocean, and add the fact that your footsteps move slower, the canyon shifts, and there are creatures swimming through the echoes. That's what sonar mapping is like. To make things harder, mapping from satellites doesn't help. The water's surface hides what lies below. Unlike Mars or the Moon, which we can photograph in crisp detail, our oceans conceal their contours. And while sonar is accurate, it's also slow. At current rates, completing a full map of the ocean floor could take centuries without global cooperation. So far, we've mapped less than a third of the way yet. And most of that is at low resolution, like looking at a forest from an airplane and trying to count the trees. High-resolution mapping exists only in fragments, around major shipping lanes, near coastlines, or in places of scientific or economic interest. The irony is sharp. We dream of interstellar travel, of stepping foot on alien planets. We talk about colonizing Mars, and yet on our own world, just beneath our feet, lie canyons larger than the Grand Canyon, mountain ranges that dwarf the Rockies, and entire ecosystems untouched by human eyes. Some call it the final frontier, but unlike space, this frontier breathes. It shifts with the tides, hums with unknown life, and pushes back against every attempt to chart it. And still we try, because there's something deeply human about the urge to know what we cannot see, to reach into darkness and feel for meaning. And while the ocean may never fully reveal itself, it reminds us, with every failed probe and broken cable, that knowing something is not the same as understanding it. Some frontiers don't yield to speed. They require patience, reverence, and listening. And so we map, slowly. We build better machines, sturdier hulls, smarter software. We launch them into the dark, not to dominate, but to discover. We lean over the edge of ships, watching as the machines disappear into the waves, and we wait. What will come back is rarely what we expect, but always, always, it is worth the journey. Long before we sent down cameras or submersibles, long before sonar swept the seafloor and names like Mariana or Hadal-Pelagic were etched into textbooks, the ocean already had a place in the human imagination. It was not a map to be filled in. It was a mystery to be feared or revered. When early civilizations looked out at the horizon, they didn't see an opportunity for scientific exploration. They saw a threshold between the known and the unknown, a boundary where the familiar ended and something ancient and enormous began. And because they couldn't dive beneath the surface, they filled the darkness with meaning. Stories rose like fog from the sea, and in those stories the ocean became alive, not just with creatures, but with gods, spirits and symbols. In Mesopotamian mythology, the primordial goddess Tiamat was the sea itself, chaotic, boundless and maternal. She gave birth to the first gods, but when they rebelled, she transformed into a massive sea serpent, a dragon of the deep, and became the enemy of cosmic order. Her defeat, in some versions, created the world. Her body split into sky and land. The ocean, in that telling, was not merely dangerous, it was the origin of everything, and the place where all things could return to chaos. The Greeks too gave the sea its own moods and motives. Poseidon, with his trident and horses of foam, ruled the waters, but did not tame them. He was fickle, stormy and proud. Worshipping him did not guarantee safe passage. It merely acknowledged that the sea was not yours to command. It was a realm of emotion and eruption, of deep calm and sudden violence. Sailors feared Poseidon not because he was evil, but because he was unknowable, much like the ocean itself. In Norse mythology, the world's serpent Jörmungandr lives in the sea, encircling the earth with his massive body. When he moves, storms follow. When he rises, the world edges toward its end. The sea here is not just home to monsters, it is a monster, coiled around our reality, reminding us how small we truly are. In Japan, sailors feared the umibozu, a sea spirit with a round, shadowy head and towering presence. If angered, it could sink ships with a glance, and it was impossible to predict. Some legends say it was the ghost of drowned monks, others a shapeshifter. But all agreed on one thing: it lived where humans did not belong. Even in language, the sea carries the weight of mystery. We say something is unfathomable when it escapes our understanding. We speak of plumbing the depths, not just when we describe diving, but when emotions run heavy and dark. Grief can come in waves. Despair can feel like drowning. And when we describe someone who seems emotionally still, we say they are deep, as if something stirs far beneath their surface. The myths we've passed down are not just about sea monsters or gods with angry eyes. They are reflections of ourselves, of our fears, our questions, our awe. The Kraken, for instance, wasn't simply a giant squid. It was a way of naming that unsettling feeling of helplessness when you look out over the open sea and realise you're a speck in a vast living thing. When sailors described tentacles pulling entire ships under, they were describing more than animals. They were describing the limits of control, the horror of being swallowed by the unknown. And these stories are not just relics. They continue to appear in modern tales, our books, our films, our dreams. The sea remains a place where logic bends, where things emerge that should not exist, where silence has weight, and darkness is not just a backdrop, but a character in the scene. It's not surprising then that even today, when we know the names of trench systems and hydrothermal vents, the ocean still feels eerie. It still feels other. The language of myth may have softened, replaced by documentaries and research papers, but the emotional undercurrent remains, because no matter how many measurements we make, no matter how much data we collect, there is still something about the ocean, especially the deep ocean, that refuses to be pinned down. It's not just that it's dark, it's that we fill that darkness with something ancient, and when we look into it, we see something looking back, something quiet, something vast, something like ourselves, only older. So when you next hear of sea monsters, when you read about gods with tridents or serpents with coils long enough to hold the world, don't dismiss them too quickly. These weren't just mistakes made by people without science. They were languages for wonder. They were emotional maps of a world too large to hold in the mind. And perhaps, even now in the age of satellites and sonar, they still are. Long before we sent down cameras or submersibles, long before sonar swept the seafloor and names like Mariana or Hadal Pelagic were etched into textbooks, the ocean already had a place in the human imagination. It was not a map to be filled in. It was a mystery to be feared or revered. When early civilizations looked out at the horizon, they didn't see an opportunity for scientific exploration. They saw a threshold between the known and the unknown, a boundary where the familiar ended and something ancient and enormous began. And because they couldn't dive beneath the surface, they filled the darkness with meaning. Stories rose like fog from the sea, and in those stories the ocean became alive, not just with creatures, but with gods, spirits and symbols. In Mesopotamian mythology, the primordial goddess Tiamat was the sea itself, chaotic, boundless and maternal. She gave birth to the first gods, but when they rebelled she transformed into a massive sea serpent, the dragon of the deep, and became the enemy of cosmic order. Her defeat, in some versions, created the world. Her body split into sky and land. The ocean, in that telling, was not merely dangerous, it was the origin of everything, and the place where all mother things could return to chaos. The Greeks too gave the sea its own moods and motives. Poseidon, with his trident and horses of foam, ruled the waters but did not tame them. He was fickle, stormy and proud. Worshipping him did not guarantee safe passage. It merely acknowledged that the sea was not yours to command. It was a realm of emotion and eruption, of deep calm and sudden violence. Sailors feared Poseidon not because he was evil, but because he was unknowable, much like the ocean itself. In Norse mythology, the world serpent Jörmungandr lives in the sea, encircling the earth with his massive body. When he moves, storms follow. When he rises, the world edges toward its end. The sea here is not just home to monsters. It is a monster, coiled around our reality, reminding us how small we truly are. In Japan, sailors fear the umibozu, a sea spirit with a round, shadowy head and towering presence. If angered, it could sink ships with a glance, and it was impossible to predict. Some legends say it was the ghost of drowned monks, others a shapeshifter. But all agreed on one thing: it lived where humans did not belong. Even in language, the sea carries the weight of mystery. We say something is unfathomable when it escapes our understanding. We speak of plumbing the depths, not just when we describe diving, but when emotions run heavy and dark. Grief can come in waves. Despair can feel like drowning. And when we describe someone who seems emotionally still, we say they are deep, as if something stirs far beneath their surface. The myths we've passed down are not just about sea monsters or gods with angry eyes. They're reflections of ourselves, of our fears, our questions, our awe. The Kraken, for instance, wasn't simply a giant squid. It was a way of naming that unsettling feeling of helplessness when you look out over the open sea and realise you're a speck in a vast living thing. When sailors described tentacles pulling entire ships under, they were describing more than animals. They were describing the limits of control, the horror of being swallowed by the unknown. And these stories are not just relics. They continue to appear in modern tales, our books, our films, our dreams. The sea remains a place where logic bends, where things emerge that should not exist, where silence has weight, and darkness is not just a backdrop, but a character in the scene. It's not surprising then that even today, when we know the names of trench systems and hydrothermal vents, the ocean still feels eerie. It still feels other. The language of myth may have softened, replaced by documentaries and research papers, but the emotional undercurrent remains. Because no matter how many measurements we make, no matter how much data we collect, there is still something about the ocean, especially the deep ocean, that refuses to be pinned down. It's not just that it's dark, it's that we fill that darkness with something ancient, and when we look into it, we see something looking back, something quiet, something vast, something like ourselves, only older. So when you next hear of sea monsters, when you read about gods with tridents or serpents with coils long enough to hold the world, don't dismiss them too quickly. These weren't just mistakes made by people without science. They were languages for wonder. They were emotional maps of a world too large to hold in the mind. And perhaps, even now in the age of satellites and sonar, they still are. When you picture life on Earth, you might instinctively imagine it basking in sunlight. Plants reaching upward, animals stirring in the golden warmth of day. Even deep-sea fish, at least in old cartoons, are shown with grins and goggles, glowing faintly in the dark but still somehow tethered to the light above. But down in the true depths, below even the reach of faint blue rays, there are places where light is not missing, it is irrelevant. Places where life has not just adapted to darkness, but grown from it. Strange cities rise there without brick or beam, where energy comes not from the sun, but from the planet's breath. These are the hydrothermal vents. Along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates pull apart, the Earth opens its seams. Superheated water, laced with minerals and gases from the mantle, erupts into the ocean, forming plumes that shimmer with chemical energy. This water isn't boiling in the usual sense. It can reach over 350 degrees Gauss, but the immense pressure of the deep sea keeps it from turning to steam. Instead, it rises like smoke through the cold, inky blackness, forming towers of metal and minerals, black smokers, as scientists sometimes call them. These chimneys build themselves grain by grain, layer by layer, growing upward into forests of stone where no sunlight has ever wandered. And around them, against all expectation, life gathers. It's not the kind of life you find in tide pools or coral reefs. There are no photosynthesizers here, no sun-fed algae or leafy seaweed. Instead, life is built on a different foundation: chemosynthesis. Tiny bacteria, invisible to the naked eye, convert the toxic chemicals in the vent water, especially hydrogen sulfide, into energy. They are the pioneers, and where pioneers flourish, settlers follow. One of the strangest creatures drawn to these vents is the giant tube worm, a being so unlike anything on land that it seems imagined. Up to 2 meters tall, it has no mouth, no stomach, and no digestive system at all. Instead, it lives in partnership with the bacteria inside its body. The bacteria take in the chemicals, the worm takes in the bacteria. Together they create something neither could accomplish alone, a living monument to cooperation in the dark, and the tube worm is far from alone. There are shrimp here, but not the kind you've seen in aquariums or on dinner plates. These shrimp cluster by the thousands, often stacking on top of one another, their backs turned toward the hot vents. Some have special light sensing spots on their backs, not true eyes but patches that can detect infrared heat, a sense evolved not to see the world, but to feel the warmth of survival. There are crabs that walk in slow circles, their pale shells dusted with minerals. Ghostly octopuses drift above the vents like jellyfish that forgot how to sting. To human eyes, this ecosystem appears almost dreamlike. Creatures pulse and sway. Gases billow like smoke from an underwater campfire. No sound travels far and no colour remains vibrant. And yet this place is bustling, alive. Not just surviving in the absence of sunlight, but thriving in spite of it. What's most astonishing is not just that life exists here, but that it's so radically different. This is, quite literally, a second recipe for life. A parallel biosphere. One that does not rely on the surface or the sky. One that could, in theory, exist elsewhere in the universe. That's why when scientists speak about hydrothermal vents, their voices often turn speculative. They begin to mention names like Europa and Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn respectively, icy bodies with subsurface oceans and suspected hydrothermal activity. Just like Earth's vents, those alien seas may host warmth beneath their crusts, and if warmth meets water and the right chemicals, well, life might not be such a rare accident after all. It might be a pattern, a possibility. So when we study vents, we're not just peering into Earth's secrets. We're looking into cosmic questions, using our own ocean as a laboratory of what might be. Could life exist without sunlight? The answer is already yes. Could it evolve, diversify, form webs of interaction, cooperation and survival? Again, yes. And this changes things. The deep sea, once imagined as a sterile graveyard beneath the waves, now stands as a cathedral of possibility. It hums, not with noise, but with resilience. It pulses, not with light, but with energy. And every creature that crawls, clings, or drifts near these vents carries a quiet message. Life is patient. Life is inventive. Life finds a way, even in the dark. As you imagine these hidden cities tonight, these softly glowing towers beneath a crushing ocean, remember that they are not ruins. They are beginnings. They are not alien, even as they seem strange. They are Earth's own experiments, running silently hour after hour in a place no sunlight has touched. And perhaps, as your breathing slows and the quiet settles in, you can feel that sense of awe, not sharp or sudden, but slow and steady, like a current beneath thought. Not everything that matters can be seen. Not every miracle comes with fanfare. Some are found at the bottom of the world, where smoke becomes food and darkness becomes home. If you were to keep descending past the sunlight, past the twilight, past the midnight waters where even hydrothermal vents flicker and fade, you would enter a realm deeper still. A place so rarely visited, so lightly touched, it is almost mythic in its obscurity. This is the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek god of the underworld, and fittingly it is the ocean's own underworld, silent, dark, crushing, and full of creatures that seem to belong more to dreams than to biology. The Hadal Zone begins roughly 6,000 metres below sea level and stretches to the deepest known parts of the ocean, such as the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. Unlike the broader abyssal plains above, this zone is narrow and fragmented, found only in the deepest oceanic trenches. Long, V-shaped scars etched into Earth's crust by the movement of tectonic plates. In many ways, it is not a continuous ecosystem, but a collection of isolated worlds, separated by thousands of kilometres and often containing species unique to a single trench. And yet even here, in what might be the most extreme environment on Earth, life persists. The creatures of the Hadal Zone are not flashy. They are not colourful, not fast, not large in the way we typically imagine. But they are strange, profoundly strange, and in their strangeness, there is beauty. One of the most well-known oddities of the deep sea is a phenomenon called deep sea gigantism, a tendency for some species to grow to unusually large sizes. Here, amphipods, normally tiny crustaceans, can reach the size of a human hand. Isopods, distant relatives of the pillbug, grow into armoured creatures longer than a loaf of bread. Their shapes are familiar, almost comical, but their scale is not. They drift slowly across the sediment, pale and deliberate, like custodians of a forgotten world. Why did they grow so large? The reasons are still being debated. Some scientists suggest it's an adaptation to cold temperatures and slow metabolisms. Others point to the scarcity of food. When meals are few and far between, having a large body may help store energy for the long waits in between. Whatever the reason, the result is clear. These creatures appear exaggerated, like something drawn by a child who remembered the shape but not the size. But just as some life grows enormous, other forms become astonishingly small. Beneath the surface sediment of deep trenches, researchers have found microbes living in the pores of rocks and mud, some so minimal in structure that they blur the line between life and chemistry. These microorganisms survive on trace nutrients, often left behind by the slow rain of organic material from above, and they do not move quickly, but replicate only once every 100 years, a pace of life that is nearly still. But they endure, patient, invisible, quietly keeping time in a world that rarely stirs. Then there are the creatures that defy the very notions of body and sense. Some fish have no eyes. Others have eyes so poorly developed they are little more than shadow sensors. Many are transparent, allowing light, or what little of it exists, to pass straight through them. Some have gelatinous bodies that collapse under their own weight if brought to the surface. They are built not to stand, but to float. Not to see, but to feel. Not to chase, but to wait. One such creature is the Hadal snailfish, a pale, soft-bodied fish that has been observed at depths of over 8,000 metres. It moves with a grace that feels almost unreal, gliding slowly through a world of silt and silence. It is not fast, it's not strong, but it is perfectly suited to its place in the world. In its quiet way it says, "I am meant to be here." And what makes all of this more remarkable is how little we truly know. More than 90% of the species collected from the Hadal Zone have yet to be formally studied, classified or named. We have glimpsed them through submersible windows, through video feeds, through the occasional sample brought to the surface intact, but we have not met them properly. We do not know their stories. We only know that they exist, that they wait, and that they continue. In a way, the Hadal world is a reminder that life does not need our awareness to be real. It does not need a spotlight to thrive. These organisms are not there for us. They are not seeking discovery. They are simply living, on terms shaped by millions of years of pressure, cold and silence. And perhaps that is what is most humbling about the deep sea. It refuses to centre us. It does not react to our presence. It does not collapse into metaphor unless we place one there. It continues, with or without us, like a forest that never knew fire or a star that never knew an observer. As you imagine these creatures, gigantic crustaceans, translucent fish, microbes frozen in slow motion, try to feel what it means to exist in a place so far from warmth, from light, from the chaos of the surface. Feel the weight of water pressing gently, the silence holding everything in place. This is not a world in a hurry. It is a world at peace with its stillness. And maybe, just maybe, as your breath settles and your body grows heavy with rest, you can understand the lesson the Hadal Zone offers, not in words, not in knowledge, but in presence. that life, even in the darkest corners, is still life. And that stillness too is a kind of wonder. When you think of light, you probably imagine something familiar. Sunbeams through a window, the soft glow of a bedside lamp, the flicker of candlelight on a quiet evening. But in the deep sea, light takes on a different form. It doesn't come from the sun, and it doesn't follow the rhythms of day and night. It blooms in pulses, in glimmers, in gentle signals that last just long enough to be noticed, but never long enough to flood the dark. It is not a gift from above, it is something life creates for itself. In the lightless zones of the ocean where the sun has long been forgotten, bioluminescence becomes one of the most remarkable adaptations to ever evolve. Scientists estimate that up to 90% of all deep-sea organisms use some form of it. These are not rare flashes in the dark. This is a language, a way of being. At its core, bioluminescence is a chemical reaction, a quiet interaction between luciferin, a molecule that emits light, and oxygen, often aided by an enzyme called luciferase. When combined, the result is cold light. No heat, no flame, just a soft glow. The exact colour can vary, but in the deep ocean, blue-green is the most common, because those wavelengths travel farthest through salt water. It is the colour of calm, of signal, of intent. But why produce light at all? For some creatures, it's a trap. The anglerfish, one of the most well-known deep-sea hunters, dangles a glowing lure from a modified spine above its mouth. In the inky black, this flicker draws curious prey. One wrong move, one moment of interest, and this trap is sprung. Not violently, but swiftly, as if the darkness itself had teeth. For others, light is a shield. Certain shrimp and squid can produce a sudden burst of brightness, a flash like underwater lightning meant to startle predators or mask an escape. Some eject luminous clouds like ink that glows, confusing attackers and buying precious seconds to disappear. It's not aggression. It's camouflage by brilliance. And then there's communication. Many jellyfish glow in slow pulses, their bodies lighting up rhythmically like breath. Some fish have light organs arranged in species-specific patterns, messages written in blinking code, understood only by others of their kind. Others, like the vampire squid, use glowing arms not for hunting, but for display. They are not violent hunters, as their name might suggest. Instead, they drift gently, feeding on detritus, flashing only when disturbed, more like a curtain of light than a predator. Bioluminescence can even serve a purpose in mating, helping animals find each other in the vastness. Imagine trying to locate a single companion in an infinite night, without voice or scent or footstep. Light becomes the only signal, a soft beacon against silence. And all around, these lights shimmer and move, not constantly, not like city lights or fireflies in the summer, but intermittently, mysteriously, a pulse here, a blink there, some so faint they barely register, others bright enough to momentarily illuminate a scene before fading back into black. If you could float motionless in these waters, eyes adjusted, heart quiet, you might begin to notice a kind of rhythm. Not in time exactly, but in presence. Lights blink in patterns that suggest intention. Some rise slowly from below like stars ascending. Others fall, trailing their own soft spark. Some spiral. Some stutter. Some simply pulse and go still again. In these moments, the deep sea begins to resemble a galaxy, not of fire and distance, but of softness and patience. Each light, a message, each blink, a presence, a living system, where communication must be brief, efficient, and beautiful. And yet, it is important to remember, this is not a performance. These lights are not for us. They are not decorative or whimsical. They are tools, signals, tactics honed by millions of years of adaptation. They exist not for wonder, but for survival, for food, for protection, for finding something or someone in a world without features. But even so, it's hard not to feel wonder. There's a kind of honesty in the way these creatures use light. They do not waste it. They do not shine more than they must. They glow only when the moment calls for it. And in that restraint, there is something deeply calming. In a world where everything is often loud and bright, the quiet flashes of the abyss offer something gentler, a reminder that not all communication requires volume. Some of it can be quiet, ephemeral, and still be understood. As you imagine these creatures tonight, floating slowly, blinking like distant thoughts, let their presence soothe you. Let the darkness feel less empty and more alive, because it is. Because even in the coldest, darkest places on Earth there is life, and where there is life there is light, not always bright, but always enough. To move in the deep sea is to move with intention, or perhaps more truthfully with restraint. In the upper world, movement often carries with it a sense of urgency. The dash to the train, the stretch of the morning walk, the restless fidget of a tired body searching for comfort. But in the deep ocean where energy is precious and light does not lend itself to speed, movement becomes something else entirely. It becomes artful, minimal, efficient, more of a presence than an action. You do not sprint in the deep, you drift. Here, motion is governed by currents more than muscles, by stillness more than struggle. A jellyfish doesn't swim so much as it pulses gently, rising and falling like a slow breath. A comb jelly refracts light along its shimmering ridges, drifting with the patience of a leaf in a pond, nudged not by choice but by flow. Even fish built for these depths, with soft fins and delicate frames, move not like arrows but like echoes, curved, curling, smooth. They do not cut through the water. They listen to it, feel it, and follow. This is not laziness. It is survival. Food in the deep sea does not arrive often, nor in abundance. A single whalefall, a carcass drifting down from above, might feed an entire ecosystem for years. Other meals come in flakes, marine snow, the soft drift of organic matter from the surface falling slowly through the water column like dust in a quiet room. It is not fast and it is not predictable. So the creatures that live here have evolved to wait, to conserve, to make the most of what is given. This need for efficiency extends not only to feeding, but to sensing. In a place where light offers no help, and where the world can stretch endlessly in all directions, finding food, or avoiding becoming food, requires other skills. Many deep-sea animals have developed the ability to sense vibrations in the water. A movement a metre away becomes a ripple, a whisper across the skin. Some use long tendrils or filament-like arms to feel the water around them, to notice the moment the current changes, however slightly. Some species, like certain deep-diving whales and fish, rely on sound, not the loud, echoing kind we associate with thunder or speech, but subtle, carefully tuned frequencies. In the deep ocean, sound travels faster and farther than in air, and it carries information more faithfully. Whales can communicate across entire ocean basins, their songs bending and sliding through thermoclines and trenches. Other animals emit gentle clicks or pulses, echolocation used not to map an environment in detail, but to sense what is near, what is moving, and what must be avoided or pursued. Movement in this world is not always physical. Sometimes it's about waiting. Sometimes it's about floating without resistance. Sometimes it's about releasing a muscle rather than contracting one. There are animals that spend their entire lives hovering just above the seafloor, never landing, never rising too far, but existing in a kind of gentle suspension. It is not stillness in the absolute sense, but a state of being held. Not motionless, but at peace. It's a rhythm that mirrors something quiet inside of us. In the rush of daily life, we often forget what it feels like to move slowly, to let things happen without forcing them. But down here, the deep sea reminds us, not all progress is fast, not all navigation is done by steps. Sometimes the wisest course is to feel the current and allow yourself to follow it. to move without pushing, to trust that you will arrive where you are meant to be in time. There's something poetic in how these animals live, a kind of underwater ballet where nothing is wasted and everything is adapted to the silence. A shrimp flicks its tail and vanishes into the dark. A fish tilts its fins and sinks, not fighting the water, but folding into it. A squid releases a cloud of ink, glowing briefly, and turns with such softness that it seems to dissolve rather than escape. And in all of it there is sound. Not noise but resonance, not clamour but hum. The sea speaks in low frequencies and long waves, in pulses and echoes. A whale's call, the scrape of shifting sand, the distant groan of tectonic movement. If the ocean has a voice, it is not one that shouts. It sings slowly, and those who live within it have learned to listen. As you rest tonight, imagine your body not as something that must go somewhere, but as something already in motion, slow motion like a drifting plankton. Every breath a small wave, every heartbeat a signal through the dark. You're not still, you're simply moving differently now, gently, without effort. Like the creatures of the deep, you are conserving energy for what matters. You are sensing more than seeing, feeling more than chasing. You are part of a world where the dance is slow, the rules are soft, and survival is a kind of poetry, and in that stillness there is peace. For most of human history, the deep sea was a realm we could only imagine. It lay beneath the reach of our lungs, beyond the pressure our bones could withstand, below the light our eyes could follow. And so we dreamed of it from afar, turning it into myth, symbol and metaphor. But slowly, carefully, we began to reach toward it. Not with our bodies at first, but with our tools. Exploring the deep is not like exploring a mountain or a cave. It requires machines that can resist thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch, that can function in total darkness, and that can return with information more fragile than any treasure. And those machines must be built with the knowledge that even in their resilience, they are guests in a world that does not need them. Today, much of our knowledge comes from ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, which are piloted from ships on the surface. They descend through the water, trailing long umbilical cords of fibre optic cable, bringing eyes and hands into places we cannot follow. Equipped with robotic arms, cameras and sensors, they allow scientists to interact with the deep without physically being there. They can collect samples, measure temperatures, test chemical compositions, all without disturbing too much, if used gently. Still, the pressure and the distance mean that every movement must be deliberate. There is no rushing here. Then there are the AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles that move on their own. Pre-programmed and untethered, they drift through darkness like mechanical whales, humming softly with data instead of breath. They cannot be controlled in real time, and so they must be designed to understand their environment, to adapt and record and return when their journey is complete. These vehicles are the quiet explorers, gathering information in long arcs, sometimes for weeks, before surfacing with hard drives full of unseen worlds. And now, a newer generation of tools is emerging, ones designed not to take but to listen. Technologies like environmental DNA sampling, eDNA, can detect life not by capturing it, but by tracing what it leaves behind. A scale, a skin cell, a drop of mucus, enough to confirm that something was there, even if we never see it directly. It's a science of whispers, a way of knowing without disturbing, and in the deep sea that may be the most respectful kind of knowing we can offer. In some places, we've even established long-term observers, networks of fixed underwater observatories such as Neptune, Canada, that sit quietly on the seafloor, recording everything from seismic activity to animal movement to water chemistry. These instruments do not move. They simply watch. They extend our senses into a realm where we cannot dwell, like lanterns placed in an endless night, flickering gently, waiting to see what passes by. But perhaps the most human element of deep-sea exploration is not in the machines, but in the people who create and guide them. In 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron descended alone into the Challenger Deep, the deepest known part of the ocean. His submersible, the Deep Sea Challenger, was a slender, pressure-proof capsule custom paths to beat it. Journey. The dive took over 2 hours. The descent was silent. The ocean, he later said, was lunar, desolate, forbidding. There were no fanfares, no great discoveries, just mud, darkness, and the profound realization that we are small, very small, on a very large, very silent planet. Other scientists and engineers have shared similar experiences. They speak not of adrenaline, but of awe, not of conquest, but of contact. For many, touching the deep sea through a robot, a sensor, a camera, is less about collecting data and more about listening. The goal is not to disturb, but to witness, to approach the unknown with care and to leave it intact. And yet, despite all our technological marvels, deep-sea exploration remains rare. It is expensive. Each mission requires massive resources: ships, fuel, maintenance, human crews, and weeks of preparation. It is dangerous. A single equipment failure at 10,000 meters can mean total loss. And it is difficult to justify when other problems on land, on the surface, seem more urgent. But still, we go. We go because there is something sacred in the unknown, something that calls not for urgency, but for reverence. The deep sea is not just a field of study, it is a place, a real place with real life that asks for more than curiosity. It asks for humility. So we build machines not just to go deeper, but to go quieter. We create sensors that can feel a fish's presence without needing to catch it. We design submersibles that move with the softness of drifting kelp. And we train ourselves to watch without interrupting. Because in the end, the goal is not to turn the ocean into a laboratory. The goal is to stand, metaphorically, on its threshold and say, "We see you, we honour you, and we will try to understand without taking more than we give." For all the gentleness we aspire to bring, for all the instruments that whisper instead of shout, there remains another truth, quieter still, but heavier. We are not just explorers of the deep, we are intruders, and in ways both accidental and deliberate, we have begun to leave our fingerprints where no light reaches. The deep sea, once thought immune to human influence by virtue of its remoteness, is no longer untouched. What was once spared by inaccessibility is now vulnerable through innovation. As our tools have become more capable, our reach has grown longer, and with it, our ability to extract, disturb, and forget. One of the most concerning developments is the rise of deep-sea mining. Beneath the ocean floor lie deposits of rare earth metals, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and more, formed over millions of years into nodules, crusts, and hydrothermal remnants. These metals are essential to modern technologies: smartphones, batteries, wind turbines. And as demand for sustainable energy increases, so too does the appetite for the materials required to power it. Mining companies now look to the seafloor as a new frontier, not because it's ready, but because the land has grown scarce. Proposals and test operations have already begun in international waters, targeting regions like the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the Pacific. Machines built to crawl across the ocean bottom, scoop up nodules and release sediment plumes are now being tested. But with each scoop, we disturb habitats that have existed in balance for millennia. Ecosystems built on stillness and subtlety cannot regenerate on industrial timelines. What's perhaps most unsettling is how irreversible these actions may be. In the deep sea, change does not unfold in years or even centuries. It unfolds in ants, in slow motion. Organisms adapted to the most stable environments on Earth may not recover once disrupted. Sediment clouds may smother life in adjacent regions. Larvae may no longer find the chemical cues they once followed. And yet, we mine in the dark, unable to fully see what we may be erasing. But mining is only one form of harm. Another, quieter, more ubiquitous, is plastic. It begins at the surface, a bottle tossed from a ship, a bag carried by wind, microbeads from cosmetics or clothing fibres. But nothing in the ocean stays on the surface forever. Plastics drift downward, pulled by gravity, swallowed by fish, embedded in waste, and eventually they reach the bottom. In 2018, researchers found plastic fibres in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the Earth's oceans, not near the top, not halfway down, but at the very floor of the world. Plastic that had once brushed human hands, now resting among creatures that have never seen sunlight. There is no corner remote enough to escape what we discard. And while the visible pieces, bottles, bags, ropes, are disturbing, it's the microplastics that pose an even more and subtler threat. Invisible to the naked eye, they become part of the food chain. Ingested, carried, stored, passed on. A shrimp in the trench may now contain fragments of a toothbrush. A snailfish might carry the trace of a polyester thread. The silence of the deep carries echoes of the surface, and not all of them are benign. Beyond the tangible, there is another pollution less visible, but equally profound. Noise. The deep sea, long imagined as a place of perfect quiet, is now laced with sound, much of it artificial. Shipping lanes with their endless engine churn, military sonar pinging through waters once untouched, even deep-sea mining tests which release continuous low-frequency rumbling disrupt animals that depend on sound not just for communication, but for navigation, mating and hunting. Whales, whose songs can travel across oceans, become disoriented. Squid may strand themselves after sonar blasts. Fish that once sensed vibration to detect predators may now be confused by a wall of industrial sound. These aren't dramatic events. There are no explosions, no headlines, just a gradual global shift from silence to static. And then, occasionally, there are the events we notice. The oil spills, the toxic leaks, the chemical discharges that make their way downward and through currents and gravity. We tend to think of oil spills as surface tragedies, affecting birds and coastlines. But oil drifts, so does mercury. So do PCBs and other pollutants, many of which sink and settle in the sediments of the deep, where they remain for decades or longer. A trench may look pristine, but test the mud, and you may find a chemical fingerprint that began in a factory far away and long ago. It's easy to forget that impact doesn't require intent. We do not need to send bulldozers or bombs. Sometimes all we need to do is continue as we are, carelessly and visibly, and the damage will still arrive. And because the deep sea is slow to change, it is also slow to heal. The harm accumulates like dust in a sealed room, quiet but persistent. And yet the deep has not rejected us. Not yet. There is still time to listen more than we take, to explore with care, to advocate for restraint, to treat this final frontier not as a resource but as a presence, as something sacred in its own quiet way. The tools we've built to see it, to know it, can also help us protect it. The observatories, the sensors, the data, all of them can speak for a realm that cannot speak for itself, because more than anything, the deep sea reminds us of a truth we often forget, that the most peaceful places are often the most fragile, that silence is not emptiness, it is balance, and once broken, it is hard to restore. So we must remember, the quiet places are no longer untouched, but they can still be respected. Time in the deep sea does not pass in the way we know it. On the surface, we track it in hours, in days, in seasons that turn like the ticking of a well-wound clock. But far below, past the reach of storms, past the pull of tides, time slows. Not metaphorically, but physically, chemically. Down there, where the cold is constant and the pressure never lifts, decay itself pauses. Movement becomes memory. Erosion becomes patience. Consider the wreck of the Titanic, lying now in two great pieces nearly 4,000 metres below the Atlantic. More than a century has passed since that ship sank, sliding into the dark, and yet it is still there. Twisted railings, collapsed decks, scattered belongings, quiet artifacts in a world that does not sweep things away. On land, rust would have eaten it within years. Waves would have broken it apart. But in the abyss, rust grows not like fire, but like lichen, slow spreading, whispering. The ship is being consumed, but not with violence. Rusticles, long icicle-like formations of oxidized metal, now hang from its beams. These are formed by bacteria that digest iron, growing over decades into long rust drapes that look more like coral than decay. They do not crash, they do not creak, they simply accumulate. The bones of the ship dissolve one molecule at a time, like old thoughts fading from memory. And the Titanic is not alone. All across the deep there are things left behind, sunken submarines, fallen aircraft, cargo lost in storms, and sometimes even human remains. Down here, the lack of oxygen, the cold and the absence of scavengers preserve what would vanish elsewhere. A shoe resting on silt. A porcelain plate still bearing its pattern. A wooden beam only slightly bowed. These are not ruins in the dramatic sense. They are not haunted houses. They are closer to footprints in wet sand, still visible long after the step was taken. Even organic matter decays more slowly. Without sunlight to drive decomposition, without warmth to fuel bacteria, bodies that reach the deep may remain recognizable for astonishing lengths of time. Some fade gently, others seem suspended in a kind of stillness, not alive, not exactly gone, but caught in a world where time cannot easily continue. It is in this way that the deep becomes a museum without visitors, a place where history is not curated, but simply endures. There are no signs, no tour guides, no velvet ropes, and yet everything remains in place, not forever, but for long enough that it begins to feel eternal. Time moves differently in the abyss, not because clocks slow, but because change slows, because events that would unfold in minutes above, oxidation, decomposition, collapse, are stretched across decades. There is no urgency here, no countdown, no rush, only layers, sediment settling on sediment, memory settling into matter. And perhaps most striking of all is the silence, not just the absence of noise, but the absence of interruption. On the surface, ruins are overtaken by weather, by weeds, by new construction, but the ocean does not rebuild, it does not repurpose, it simply holds, and holding over time becomes a kind of reverence. The sea does not forget quickly, and in that there is something deeply human, because we, too, long to hold on to what has passed, to remember, even when the memory becomes blurred, to preserve, even when we know that all things decay. The deep sea reflects this impulse, not in intention, but in effect. It keeps things not because it means to, but because it is slow, because it changes less than we do. Imagine, if you will, standing on the sea floor beside a sunken relic. The light from your submersible cuts through darkness not to reveal chaos, but stillness. Silt drifts like dust in a forgotten room. No fish flee, no sound arrives. The object before you, be it ship or shoe or shell, is not new, but it has not been claimed by ruin. It simply remains, undisturbed, witnessed again after decades by eyes it never expected. And this, more than anything, alters your sense of time. Not just how long something has been there, but how long it could remain. How long you might be forgotten before being remembered. How long memory itself might linger, not in the mind, but in the world. You begin to understand that the deep is not only dark, it is patient. And in its patience it becomes a space where history exhales slowly, without grief, without fanfare, without end. 1,000 years pass, and the sand doesn't stir. That is the pace of the abyss. There's a curious thing that happens when people descend into the deep sea, not to the edge of it, but to the places where sunlight is a memory, and pressure becomes the most intimate force surrounding you. The body reacts, of course. It adjusts, prepares, remains vigilant. But the mind, the mind does something stranger. It lets go. For the few who have sat inside submersibles, watching the world disappear behind layers of sea, there is a recurring description that arises. Not technical, not analytical, but personal. Many report feeling disoriented, not just spatially, but temporally. Time down there bends, not literally, as in the mathematics of relativity, but in the soft logic of perception. Minutes stretch like hours, or collapse into moments. Some say they lost track of time entirely. Others say they felt as though they had entered a place outside of time altogether. This sensation, sometimes referred to by researchers as oceanic time loss, or deep sea vertigo, has been the subject of quiet psychological study. It is not the dizziness of spinning nor the confusion of illness. It is something gentler, a dissociation from the tick of the clock and a reconnection with something slower, older, more expansive. The mind, no longer bombarded by light or landmarks or human voices, begins to drift like the creatures outside the submersible window. Thought on tethers. Awareness shifts. Some describe the experience as meditative. The steady hum of equipment, the glow of control panels, the dim, endless black, pressing in from all sides. There is nothing to do but watch, breathe, and feel. Others find it unsettling, a kind of existential exposure, as if the vastness of the unknown presses not just on the vessel, but on the psyche. There are no trees to orient yourself by, no stars, no ceilings, just an unbounded dark and your small, temporary place within it. And yet even those who feel unnerved often return with a sense of reverence. They speak of the deep as if it were a cathedral, Aeolian yes, but holy. They speak of the silence not as emptiness, but as presence. As a kind of listener that does not interrupt. Many explorers report feeling watched, but not threatened, held, but not comforted. The sea, they say, does not offer warmth, but it offers space. Space to think, space to feel, space to become very, very quiet. A few even describe it in terms normally reserved for spiritual experience. It felt like dying, one pilot said, not with fear, but with peace. Not a cessation of life, but of noise, identity, expectation. Another compared it to floating in a memory, something once known, now revisited. A place where thought becomes sensation, and sensation becomes stillness. There are parallels to this in psychology. The philosopher William James once referred to a mystical experience as one marked by ineffability, passivity, and timelessness. Something beyond description that feels more like returning than discovering. And while not every diver or researcher descends that far, those who do often return changed. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a softened quietness, like someone who has sat too long beside a sleeping fire. Even in shallow dives or extended periods aboard research vessels, crew members report a kind of mental shift. As the days pass and land becomes memory, something inside unwinds. The world slows. Conversations become fewer, but deeper. Attention shifts from noise to nuance, from what's urgent to what's simply present. And in this mental stillness, something rare emerges, an appreciation not for what we can do, but for what we do not understand. Because the truth is, the deep sea is not just another environment. It is not just a location on a map. It is an invitation to step outside of the visible world and into a space that does not cater to us, that does not explain itself, that does not bend toward clarity. And in a world that so often demands answers, the ocean asks a different question. Can you sit with mystery? Can you be small without fear? Can you drift without losing yourself? For some, the answer is yes. For others, it is harder. But for all who enter its quiet gravity, the ocean leaves something behind, not a scar, but a softness. A reminder that the mind, like the sea, has depths it does not always explore, and that within those depths are not monsters, but mirrors. As we reach the end of this journey together, let yourself feel that space within, the part of you that is still, slow, unseen, the part that knows how to wait, how to wonder, how to let the tide of thought recede until all that remains is breath and dark and the faint pulsing glow of quiet presence. You are not lost. You are simply drifting deep within. So now, here we are, hovering near the end of our long, quiet descent. Not at a destination, but at a depth. Not at a conclusion, but at a pause. We've drifted through pressure and shadow, myth and molecule, through biology that glows and silence that listens. And here at this soft, still place, we can finally ask not what the ocean is, but what it holds. It holds, first and always, life. Not just the kinds of life we're used to seeing in aquariums or textbooks, but life that challenges the very boundaries of our understanding. Creatures that survive without light. Ecosystems that feed on chemical breath instead of solar fire. Species that see without eyes, that move without bones, that speak in pulses and drift in rhythms older than language. The deep is not empty. It is full, brimming, quietly teeming with existences that unfold like slow poems, unnoticed by surface time. It holds time itself, not in seconds or centuries, but in a kind of sedimented memory. Bones that never fully decay, wrecks that remain for generations, the whispered traces of things lost, not gone, just changed. In the deep, the present stretches. The future waits, the past rests, mostly intact. And we, who are so used to moving quickly, find in that stillness a strange and sacred discomfort. Here, change is not urgent. It is inevitable, but slow, soft, and often unseen. It holds mystery. Despite our satellites and probes and sensors and maps, we still know so little. There are trenches we've never entered, species we've never named, entire mountain ranges hidden beneath miles of water, volcanoes that erupt without flame, rivers that run along the sea floor made not of water, but of brine. The ocean holds its secrets close, not out of spite, but simply because it can, because it doesn't need to explain itself to be real. It holds us, not just physically, though it does cradle the earth, wrapping its surface like a moving skin, but emotionally, metaphorically. We turn to the sea when we need metaphors for grief, for longing, for depth. We say we're drowning in our thoughts, that we feel adrift, that our feelings come in waves. The ocean has become the language of our inner selves, the symbol we return to again and again when words fall short and silence must be made to carry meaning. And yes, it holds harm. It has absorbed our plastics, our chemicals, our noise. It has borne the weight of our exploration and the cost of our mistakes. Mining, pollution, warming currents. They have reached even here into this place we once thought too remote to touch. And yet, despite all we have done, the ocean still holds space for beauty. It still hosts the dance of glowing creatures, the whisper of cold currents, the impossible grace of jellyfish moving like time made visible. So what does the ocean hold? It holds contradiction, stillness and movement, emptiness and life, silence and sound. It holds the known and the unknown in equal measure. And somewhere within all of that, within the glow of a lanternfish, the soft fall of marine snow, the long hush of trench floor sediments, it holds a mirror. To us, to our curiosity, our restlessness, our smallness, and perhaps most beautifully, to our capacity for wonder. You've floated alongside ancient worms and transparent fish. You've drifted near smoking vents and slow-moving giants. You've felt the pressure that could crush steel and the stillness that could calm storms. But more than anything, you've been reminded, gently, quietly, that the world is wider, deeper, older, and more mysterious than it often seems. And that's a comfort, really. Because if the deep sea can still surprise us, if mystery still lives in our own backyard, beneath our own oceans, then there's still room for awe. Still space to be humble, still time to listen. As we begin our slow ascent, let the weight of this journey settle gently across your chest. Not heavy, but grounding, like a blanket, like a tide drawing back. You don't have to remember every detail, the names of trenches, the temperature of vents, the chemistry of glowing bacteria. Those can drift away if they like. What remains is the rhythm, the tone, the hush of darkness made alive, the gentle invitation to think less, to feel more, to simply be. The deep will still be here, always waiting, watching, holding. When we talk about exploration, the language often sounds the same, planting flags, pushing boundaries, conquering the unknown. For centuries this has been our pattern, to look out at the blank spaces on maps and imagine them as puzzles to be solved, territories to be claimed, silences to be filled with our own voices. It is a mindset that brought ships across oceans, astronauts to the moon, satellites beyond the edges of our solar system. And yet the deep sea has quietly resisted this pattern. You cannot conquer the deep. It does not yield to pressure or persistence. It cannot be charted in a weekend, cannot be mapped in a lifetime. And when you try to grasp it, through wires or cameras or careful descent, it does not roar back in defiance. It simply remains, still, immense, unbothered, as if to say this is not a place for victory, this is a place for reverence. Something has shifted slowly in how we approach this space, where once the language of conquest ruled, now a new vocabulary is beginning to take hold. One shaped not by control, but by coexistence. More and more scientists speak not about dominating the deep, but about listening to it, about preserving its rhythms, understanding its fragility, and approaching it as one might approach a living being, not with the intent to own it, but to understand, to protect, to simply be near it without harm. Because to exist in the deep, even as a visitor, is to confront your own smallness. You're not the central figure here. You're not the protagonist. You are not even noticeable. And this, for many who study the deep sea, becomes a kind of relief, a soft letting go of ego, a recognition that not all frontiers need to be crossed loudly. Some are best met with quiet steps, open hands, and the humility to know that being present does not require being in charge. There is still science, of course, still data to gather, systems to map, questions to ask. But the best of that work now comes wrapped in awareness, a sense that every sample is a conversation, not a conquest. Every ROV dive is an act of observation, not invasion. We no longer speak of taming the ocean, we speak of working with it, of learning its patterns, of leaving as little trace as possible. And in this shift, we are slowly rediscovering something become unknown to ancient cultures, the idea that the ocean is not just a landscape, it is sacred. Not in a religious sense necessarily, but in the way that forests are sacred. That silence is sacred. That things beyond our understanding should be met not with fear or force, but with awe. The deep sea teaches us this, not through speeches or signs, but through its very nature. It does not compete. It does not seek attention. It does not rush. And in doing so, it offers an alternative way of being, one that is slower, softer, one that invites us to match its pace, not to rush ahead, but to slow down, to breathe deeply, to allow wonder to fill the space that ambitions once occupied. There's a kind of wisdom in this shift, a recognition that knowing more does not always mean doing more, that progress in this place is measured not in how many miles we cover, but in how gently we touch the miles we reach. Exploration becomes less of a race and more of a relationship, one that grows stronger the quieter we become. Because curiosity and reverence are not opposites, they are companions. And the deep sea is perhaps the only place left on Earth that demands both equally. It welcomes your questions, yes, but it also reminds you that some answers cannot be rushed, some knowledge cannot be forced, and some mysteries, when held carefully, become more beautiful than any conclusion. As we come to the close of this part of the journey, let this be your takeaway. Not just facts about pressure or glowing fish or ancient trenches, but the feeling of being somewhere that does not need you to fix it. Somewhere that allows you, just for a moment, to be still, to listen, to wonder. This is not a frontier for domination, it is a depth for devotion. There is a reason we so often use the sea to describe the quiet spaces inside ourselves. We speak of emotions as tides. We refer to memories as buried, drifting, or lost in the undertow. We imagine thoughts as waves, rising and crashing, or moods that ebb and flow without explanation. Somewhere along the line, we began to see the ocean not just as a body of water, but as a reflection of something internal, a metaphor for the subconscious, the unseen parts of who we are. And nowhere is that metaphor more complete than in the deep sea. Because the further you descend into yourself, beneath the noise, beneath the surface concerns, beneath the daily tides of thought and reaction, the more the landscape begins to resemble what we've been exploring together. Still, dark, silent, and not empty but mysteriously alive. Inside each of us is a place we rarely visit, a space we sometimes fear. It is the place of dreams, of unresolved question, of feelings too complex or too old to name. It is not where we live every day, but it is always there, waiting, watching, holding. Like the trenches, like the abyss, it does not call to us with volume but with presence. It is felt more than heard. And like the deep ocean, it is not chaotic by nature. It is not dangerous simply because it is dark. It is dangerous only if we enter it carelessly, only if we try to dominate it or mine it for quick answers. But if we approach it gently, with curiosity instead of control, something changes. The darkness softens. The silence becomes an invitation. We begin to feel not fear but familiarity. What if this is the true mirror the deep provides? That just as there are glowing creatures in the blackness of the sea, there are glowing truths in the blackness of the mind. Just as some deep-sea species have adapted to feel without seeing, we too can learn to sense what we cannot name. Just as movement in the deep is slow and intentional, healing within ourselves often requires patience, stillness, and time. We live in a world that values visibility. What can be shown, counted, measured? But inside, as in the ocean, much of what matters cannot be so easily mapped. Joy, grief, wonder, these do not announce themselves. They do not glow unless we take the time to drift near them, to sit beside them, to let them emerge. And maybe that's why so many people are drawn to the sea when they need to think, to mourn, to breathe. The horizon offers openness. The water carries rhythm. The waves match our breath when we're quiet enough to notice. But the deep, that part we cannot see, that part mirrors something even older. Something like intuition or knowing without knowing. Some fears live there, yes, but so do transformations. The pressure of the deep changes everything it touches. Bones bend, bodies evolve. Life rewrites its rules to survive, to thrive, even without light. So too do we. Under pressure, in silence, we adapt. We discover strength we didn't know we had. We begin to listen not just to the world, but to ourselves. And that listening, quiet, careful, unhurried, is perhaps the greatest gift both the ocean and the inner self can offer. What if the last frontier isn't out there at all? What if the greatest journey isn't to map more space or climb more heights or even dive more depths? What if it is to feel more deeply? To sit in silence and allow the unknown to be unknown? To love the mystery not because we've solved it, but because it exists. To find peace not in answers but in presence, because there is still so much to learn about the sea, about the self, but not all learning needs to be accumulation. Some learning is release, some growth happens in the stillness, in the quiet pulse beneath words, in the soft depths where thought ends and awareness begins. The ocean does not rush, and neither should we. So let the metaphor hold you now. Let it wrap around you like warm water in a dream. You're not lost, you are simply submerged. In thought, in breath, in the part of yourself that does not speak loudly but is always there, waiting, patient, vast. A frontier not of knowledge but of feeling. A sea that is not beneath your feet but within your chest. And it does not need to be crossed, it only needs to be listened to. If you could trace your journey tonight like a slow arc across the sky, it would begin not with a splash or a shout, but with a quiet question. What lies beneath? And now, as you slowly rise back from that silent realm, let's not rush to recall every step, but rather float gently through what lingers, like silt stirred by a soft current. There's no need to grasp or organise, just let these thoughts pass through you the way light ripples through shallow water, catching on a memory, then drifting away. We began where all descents begin, with pressure, with the sheer physical truth of what it means to sink below the surface of the world, to pass the line where sunlight stops and gravity starts to hum, where the weight of the ocean is not metaphor, but math. We touch the threshold where machines groan and steel folds, and we learn that the deep sea in many ways is more foreign to us than the moon. But even in that pressure there was quiet. Cold, yes, silent, always, yet not empty. We learn that darkness is not the absence of life, but sometimes the perfect cradle for it. There, where light from above cannot reach, life makes its own glow. Bioluminescence, not showy, not wasteful, but precise. A flash to attract, a pulse to warn, a flicker to connect. Species that drift and spiral, soft-bodied and slow-hearted, revealed not chaos, but design. The ocean's darkness became a canvas, not a void. We followed the vents, those underwater chimneys of superheated breath, and met the strange ecosystem that blooms in fire and chemical steam. Tube worms without mouths, bacteria that feed on sulfur, a living system that requires no sun, no surface. As if to remind us, there are other ways to exist, other definitions of life, other fires that burn in the dark. And from there we turn to the old stories, because long before we sent down cables and cameras, we sent our imaginations, gods that ruled the deep, monsters that waited beneath the hull, legends born from the edge of understanding, Tiamat, Poseidon, Jörmungandr and the Kraken, all of them efforts to give shape to the shapeless, to turn mystery into myth, fear into symbol. We saw how even language betrays our awe, unfathomable depths of feeling, plumbing the depths. We've always known the ocean speaks to more than just science. It speaks to something older, something felt. We drifted next through ecosystems vast and nearly untouched. The Hadal Zone, named for Hades, where the pressure can crush submarine sins but not the delicate glass sponge. We met giant amphipods and see-through fish, creatures that don't quite belong anywhere else. And yet they thrive. There was no grand display, no spotlight, only the ongoing murmur of survival, proof that life will always find a way to curve into whatever space it's given. We floated with the drifters, the jellyfish, the comb jellies, the plankton that move not by force but by flow. We listened to the whales' deep voices, heard about the ways predators sense vibration, and saw how movement without speed, presence without effort, defines life at depth. There is something deeply human in that recognition, that you can move without rushing, that you can be in motion without struggle, and then we turned the lens back toward ourselves, not as invaders, but as visitors. We explored the tools that let us peek into the dark, ROVs, AUVs, EDNA samplers, and deep-sea observatories. We remembered how rare these missions are, how difficult and expensive it still is to listen properly. But we also saw the shift, from conquering to coexisting, from extraction to reverence, the ocean no longer as a battlefield, but as a cathedral. Of course, we did not avoid the harder truths. We followed the threads of mining, of plastic, of forgotten pollution, drifting into places we hoped were untouched only to find our fingerprints in the silt. And yet the deep sea has not closed itself to us. It still pulses, still sings, still carries on in its quiet ways. We sat beside the Titanic's resting place and saw that even tragedy decays with grace at depth. We watched as time slowed, as rust turned into sculpture, as memories became sediment. In those ruins, we learned that not everything needs to vanish to be lost. Some things simply dissolve, molecule by molecule, into the background of something larger, and we listened to the stories of those who have been there. Not many, but enough to know that the deep affects more than your vision. It affects your mind, your sense of time, and your sense of self. Some return with a quiet they cannot shake. Others call it a kind of meditation, or the closest thing to death they've ever known, in the most peaceful way. We saw how science becomes poetry in such a place, how fact becomes feeling, how the external frontier folds inward, how the deepest parts of the earth resemble the deepest parts of ourselves, unmapped, pressurized, glowing in ways we cannot always explain. So what has this journey given you? Maybe not a list of answers, maybe not the full map, but something softer, a slower rhythm, a breath that sits just a little lower in your chest, a silence that feels less like emptiness, and more like welcome. And in that, perhaps, is the greatest truth the ocean has to offer, that wonder does not require understanding, that mystery is not a problem to solve, but a presence to sit with. There is still so much we do not know, and that is okay. And now we drift, not away from the deep but into it, not to escape it, but to let it settle into you, quietly like a tide washing in, leaving behind a soft film of stillness and dark, like a memory not erased but absorbed. You don't need to carry it all, not the names of the trenches, not the chemical formulas, not the dimensions of submersibles. Those can rest now. What remains is lighter, simpler, the hush of something vast, the pulse of something slow, the feeling of being held by a world that asks nothing of you but to float. You've spent the last 2 hours with the ocean, not just learning about it, but becoming part of it, if only for a little while. And the ocean does not test your knowledge. It does not ask for comprehension. It only offers presence. It only asks, can you let go? So, now, let go. Let your body sink deeper into wherever you are, into your bed, your chair, your breath. Notice the way gravity feels heavier when you stop resisting it. Notice how your limbs begin to fade from awareness, how your breath becomes the only sound. In, out, like waves, like jellyfish, like plankton suspended in a current that moves so slowly you're not even sure it's moving at all. You're drifting now. Not in space, but in attention. Not in confusion, but in release. And that's all right. You don't need to think anymore. You don't need to follow this to the end. There is no quiz, no final map, no one waiting to ask what you remember. Because the deep isn't something you hold on to. It's something you feel. It lives not in your mind, but in your rhythm. Let it sink. Let it dissolve into you. Breathe. You've met glowing creatures, patient predators, blind fish, and ancient myths. You've hovered near vents that smoke in silence. You've walked through ruined ships, listened to long echoes. You've seen the shimmer of life in total darkness. And now you've earned your stillness. You are not meant to understand everything, only to float. And you are floating now, in that gentle way the body remembers from before language, before instruction, a kind of original drifting, not passive, but peaceful, like a leaf on slow water, like light caught in soft waves, like a thought slipping beneath the edge of sleep. This is the part where you do nothing. Let your thoughts blur. Let your body hum quietly beneath the blankets. Let your breath keep moving, like a small current beneath the hull of a boat you're not steering. If your mind tries to return to questions, to facts or thoughts or worries, that's alright. Let them rise like bubbles, and then watch them fade. Nothing here needs your effort. Even attention is optional. You can listen or not. You can let go now. There is no more story, only sensation. No more teaching, only tide. The sea remains. Whether or not you are awake, it continues. Whether or not you remember this, it continues. You don't need to hold on to it for it to hold you. So let yourself be held. Let the world around you fade. Let the pressure of waking life lift off your shoulders. There are no deadlines down here. No sound but breath. No motion but drift. You are not behind. You're not late. You're exactly where you are meant to be. In this moment, in this quiet, in this inner sea. Let the deep rest in you now. Let it make a home somewhere behind your ribs, beneath your collarbone near the rhythm of your pulse. Let it fill the hollow spaces that don't need fixing, only softening. Let it remind you that mystery is not danger, and silence is not absence. Let it stay with you, even as you sleep. Because even in your dreams, the ocean knows your name.